But that's something that outside of the box, I know that's what we specialize here in Collingswood in terms of coming up with those ideas.
Anybody else? Please.
It seems our government, both federal and state, were driving under this policy in the past couple of years, or actually maybe the last 10, 15 years, that everybody goes to college. And having been in those settings, I've seen everybody trying to go to college. And what happens with many kids is they're not successful when they get to college. They leave college being in debt, without an education, and then are left really with no real skill and development. So I really think it is important that we go back and look at the various means and types of education and broaden that so that our students have opportunities to be successful members of the world.
Anyone else?
Sure. I spoke to Mr. Tassini after that meeting personally, and he said that most of our CTE programs that he was talking about offering aren't even up and running yet. And he said it would take about a year to put in place, which I question that, being in education, seeing how slow that process works. But there is also the option of the Camden County Tech School, which is one campus right in Pennsauken. And we were looking this up and seeing the cost that we send from Camden City, about $3,000 per student per year. So there are options for our students that we can still have these robust programs, just not in our district.
Thank you.
Yeah, just quickly, that is right, and that was one of the things that Woodland parents brought up repeatedly last night was why should we pay $15,000 to send them to Pennsauken when we could spend $3,000 to send them to Camden County. The other thing I'd point out is that we also have trades, so to speak, but perhaps they're a little bit more modern. It's for example, TV production, multimedia program, graphic arts, graphic designs, those sorts of things that are also specialized programs. So those are some things as well.
Thank you.
Anybody
else? Okay. Mr. Radesky, I wanted to ask you this next question. Part of your biography includes that you were a school resource officer at the high school and middle school. And I was wondering if you could speak to the value of a school resource officer, and maybe offer, if you could, a little bit of the context, because I think people are interested in talking about the role of police in schools or the relationship between the police and school children. So your thoughts on that, and you have 60 seconds.
Well, we talked about the having an SRO in the high school and middle school, and I would be lying if I said it doesn't benefit the community. I mean, the people who had me as an SRO, it was nothing but positive. Even in going on calls, whether good or bad, you can alleviate a situation that way. Develop a relationship with families, students. That'd be the point of contact for the school. Just working with one officer instead that's trained to deal with kids in the school, and it was very beneficial for me. Like I said, that's how I met the majority of the people here in Collingswood. I enjoy doing it. It takes a special officer to do that. Not every officer is cut out to do that. Believe me, there are other officers that like writing tickets. You'd have to run into my car in order for me to write you a ticket. Other than that, that's the kind of person I am. But the board supports the idea. It's not budgeted for this year. We'll look into it, maybe next year, and work with the borough to come to a solution. But I'm all for having an SRO.
Do you have any thoughts, just as someone who has worked with the student population, of the relationship in Collingswood among the law enforcement community and the school-aged children community, just the way things are right now?
Well, we've been having the schools for a while, and it's good to know all the schools. Like I said, I was known as Officer Steve. Of course, my DARE kids, Sunrise kids, are now 25, 30 years old. So when I see them a while with a full-grown beard, I kind of feel old. But we need to get back at the elementary level, have programs, just certain officers go in there and talk to the kids. We're here to help. We're not the bad, we're here to help the community. I know that many people may not see it that way, but the people that know me know who I am and how it could be beneficial to have the SRO or a Sunrise officer / DARE, or the improved DARE. I don't even know what it's called now. But
just relationships with kids.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have anything to add?
Yeah, we do have this in board policy now. It is still a standing policy in board to either offer or to look at the possibility of having this. But in education, the problem is always funding, and everything now with budgets is a give and take. So if you want to add something, you're going to have to delete it somewhere or find the money somewhere else by dropping something. So that's the problem. And we saw this over the last few years with our nursing, and I think the board's done a really good job to try to find full-time nurses for each school. But when you look at a budget, 90% of your budget is untouchable.
Thank you. Anybody have any additional? Mr. Conley?
Well, I mean, in terms of the school resource officer, I think that, first and foremost, this is something that has a big impact on our schools, and I think that the community should be consulted prior to the board making a decision on that. There is a lot of mixed research back and forth between whether or not those are beneficial in schools. The ACLU has a lot of information about how they can be harmful. Then there's others that say that they're great. I think that it needs a study on it, and I think that the community needs to be consulted before the board would make a decision as to whether or not to approve it or not.
That's done. Mr. Becker?
I think we've seen a lot in the recent news stories about people and relationships with police, and I feel that as we develop and are educating our children, one of the things that I remember and recall from growing up a little while ago is that we were really taught civics, and we were taught the opportunity of engagement, and we were had the opportunity to interact with firemen and police and other officers. I think it's very important that we find a way to make that happen again in order to build a good civil society.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Radesky. You have 30 seconds if you want to wrap up. You all good? Okay. Mr. Wall, I'll ask you this one. I know you have some familiarity with the way that discipline is handled in a philosophical sense in the school district. There are recent reports about mediation and peer-to-peer stuff, the end of detention, the end of suspension, etc. I just wondered, do you have thoughts on possibly some of the quality of life issues for the student body, like discipline policies, like social supports for family issues that are recognized or acknowledged in the student body? What would be some of the things that if you would want to bring a progressive attitude to the role of Board of Education member, what would you say you could do, or areas where you think that would be the case?
Sure. Our district recently, in the past 2 years, just completely shifted how we handle discipline. And 2 years ago, we had...
So just so people are aware, you don't mean the Collingswood School District?
No, I'm sorry. Where I work in Camden, City School District. We just had a report on this today that this time last year we had 441 total student suspensions. Now we're down to 71. And we put a restorative justice program in place. So it's more peer-to-peer mediation. It's more steps before you're suspending. And what we've seen is our attendance rates are increasing, and we're also seeing students staying in class and being less disruptive. So I think the more punitive way of discipline is the old way, and now we're using new progressive methods, and we're seeing the results. And I think that's something that we can definitely bring here to a level. It's nothing that puts anything strain on a budget, and it's also easily trainable for your teachers.
Anybody else have opportunity to respond to any progressive areas of policy that you'd like to bring to Mr. Perry?
I certainly think it's worth exploring those kinds of ideas. But when it comes to something particularly that sensitive to the teachers and administrators, they, of course, have to very much be a part of that conversation first and foremost, because we have to ensure that our teachers and administrators are going to remain happy and remain, because we have excellent ones in this district. So we can't just bring that to them without having them part of the initial discussion. So that's my most important thing.
Anybody else, any thoughts? Please.
Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely 100% supportive of getting away from punitive discipline. As somebody who's worked for trauma-informed agencies, we typically try to focus on the root of why children are misbehaving, why these things are occurring, and try to address those needs first. And it's extremely successful, as Jay has already mentioned. I do think that teachers need to have a lot of buy-in and input, and there needs to be a heavy investment in professional development. You can't just change the policies and expect everybody to understand how to work in that environment.
Any other thoughts, anyone?
Yes, just real quickly, in theory, I would be very in favor of what everybody is suggesting in terms of progressive. We actually do have a peer-to-peer program in town, and my daughter is actually part of it, and I know, what she has told me, it is very successful. I think we would agree, perhaps we would all agree, that there are circumstances, though, when punitive measures are deserved. That, you know, there are certainly cases when,
That's time. You can finish your thought.
when that's necessary. So we need to be mindful of that as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. White, you can have 30 seconds to wrap it up again if you're.
Sure. Right, buy-in was big. I mean, that was a big part in our district. A lot of the teachers were not in favor to start with, saying we're just letting these kids off the hook. They're not really being held for their consequences. But over time, and using the program correctly, with the right supports for the teachers, we're seeing the differences now.
Thank you. Mr. Farrow, this question is for you. I know one of the things that's on the docket for the next board will be possibility of a bond referendum to renovate the athletic facility at the high school. As far as I understand, we're still dealing with Works Progress Administration era stadia, and we want things to be, you know, in compliance, a little bit more up to date. Could you describe sort of the scope of the project that will be determined probably by the next board, and what some of the challenges are, and maybe a way to achieve this, if that's, you know, what you would do with this set of circumstances here?
Sure. Scope is pretty massive. We're talking about something that started with a stadium that's deteriorating to the point that it has to be repaired. And it's a shame, because it's a beautiful, huge concrete stadium that I would love to keep and maintain here, but the cost is just exorbitant and not really effective for us. So we're talking about replacing that, and then the field is not up to the standards necessary to compete on soccer, a very important sport for this town. And then you get to also inadequate fields for practice for baseball. So it's essentially all of our fields out there, the stadium, lighting that would have to be changed. If we're going to explore building, we might change the direction of the field and everything out there. So it's massive. In terms of accomplishing it, obviously we need the buy-in. That's a lot of funding. But I think what's most important for us to remember is the future of our high school. Certainly athletics is a huge part of that in terms of building that reputation.
Thank you, that's done. Anybody else have any thoughts? Mr.
Yeah,
Ross?
I'll just throw a couple of things in there since I'm kind of at the forefront of this. Everything Tim said is right on. The other things I would add is there's a couple of portions, there's some things that we are also looking at are academic portions. You know, some hopefully or potentially some community space. And what's vitally important to us is a situation similar to what's going on in Zane and potentially at Newby, where each of the elementary schools would get some allotment to have some kind of playground and that sort of thing. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Please, Mr. Becker.
You know, one of the things I think that's very important is the stress the importance of athletics and what it does for a community. It brings together the spirit of the community, research, and my own personal experience in supervising athletics before. I've realized that students are retained at a greater level if they're athletes. Many times their GPAs are better, believe it or not, what they're just reporting to you. And I think there's a lot of positive things that are there that would benefit the entire community. And we will need to work to find creative funding in order to make that possible.
Anybody else? Please, Mr. Desmond.
Like Mr. Farrow said, the stadium is in dire need of either replacement or redoing. We need to maximize our whatever little land we have back there and get the most fields for what we can. So it's definitely something we got to go forward with, especially because all the community uses the facilities, the midget football, soccer, rec soccer, all kind of events can be used there. We maximize the use of that land back there.
Anybody else? No? Okay. It's back to you for 30 seconds, yeah?
This is more just a pitch. I've talked about this for 3 years on our board. Please come out to our football games and big events. I don't make a lot myself, I must say, but you really don't see the reflection of our whole town there at these games, and it's a great experience. And that's part of the way we can really promote a project like this. So that's it.
Thank you. Mr. Becker, I know you have some experience in community development stuff, and your background includes being able to find ways to help generate, I think, some of the revenue that we're looking for that's sort of extra normal to the school budget. Would you speak for a little bit about what you see as some supplemental or alternative ways of fundraising for some of the programs in Collingswood that are beyond what we can count on for state aid or the 2% cap? And what would you say are the programs that, you know, you would be most interested to make sure were well funded?
Well, I think funding is an issue that we really need to tackle, and I think in order to do that, I think there's a couple of things we need to look at. We need to look carefully at how we are taxing our properties and the community. We need to look at those taxes, and many times we give up the opportunity sometimes to tax certain properties, and I think we need to make sure we have a good taxable base. In addition to the taxable base, I think then it's building outreaches with organizations. My experience has been is foundations, you know, have limited resources point, but there are lots of corporations and businesses within the community that if fostering positive relationships with them could enable us to get the additional resource needed. And I think some of the priorities need to be that we're offering a full comprehensive education to all children, and that we also have a complement of activities and other experiences engaged in their education.
Thank you. Anybody else like an opportunity to comment? I saw your hand first.
No, Mr. Kling.
I mean, well, I think that big part of it is, you know, we have to make wise investment, and there's a lot of information about how school districts can do that. Right now, P3, preschool through grade 3 research is showing that by providing a lot of services in those age groups, the district saves a ton of money down the line. And so by making wise and targeted investments in specific age groups, we can save money down the line and then reinvest that money into other services.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, just two areas that I would talk about as alternative funding. The first is, I would venture to guess that Collingswood is a preeminent supplier of shared services to many school districts throughout the state, as far away as Buna. So I think the number is around $400,000 in shared services revenue that we created last year. The other area is we're a choice district, so we also have quite a bit of revenue there.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
30 seconds to anyone else who'd like to follow up.
Sure. I think looking at alternative funding, looking at Mr. Santa, the principal of Zane, and what he does. I mean, he's like known as the grant principal and what he brings in. Him sharing those ideas with other elementary schools and the middle school and high school. Another way is a stipend for teachers, and teachers seeking out grants, being paid for the work to obtain grants. And also bringing back our special education students and having a robust program here, and then having other schools send their students here for the tuition.
Thank you.
I think another strategy that I've utilized